Welcome everyone to our session. My name is Karina Sotnik. I'm Director of Business Incubation and Accelerator Programs here at the University City Science Center. I'm also in charge of our BARDA Accelerator Network connection. And I'm happy to report that Science Center has been in a BARDA Accelerator Network now for 2.5 years. We were the original 8. And we're so delighted to have our distinguished guest today, because we want to amplify the message of BARDA and BARDA ENACT and educate people about its mission and about the technologies that it funds, and also how to apply and how to be successful in that process. So that's what we're trying to accomplish today. I just want to quickly prephrase for people that don't know, in addition to the convenience place like Venture Cafe and Quorum here at the Science Center, we also have a number of commercialization programs that start very early with the academia, with the projects still in a lab. Then we have Digital Health Accelerator that takes companies with prototypes and takes them to the next step, whether FDA approval, next funding, or sales. And then we have Global Soft Landing Program that takes scale-up companies that are looking to enter US market and helps them achieve that. So our connection with BARDA, I think, encompasses all three of these stages. We also have one of the largest tech incubators in the city that fosters a lot of companies that are, should be, and are looking for funding from places like BARDA. So it's very relevant to us. And with this, I would like to introduce our guests and actually ask them to introduce themselves. Today we have Pejman. And Pejman, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to BARDA, that would be wonderful.
Hi, my name is Pejman Narari. I'm a subject matter expert advising BARDA on wearables and diagnostics. My background is I'm a molecular virologist. I worked at Lawrence Livermore National Lab for about 11 years, mainly working on diagnostics, and then was director of R&D for a small startup in Silicon Valley for about 3 years before joining BARDA's Drive division about 2.5 years ago.
Thank you so much. And we also have Dr. Sheila Selmovich. And Sheila, sorry, if you can talk about yourself and your position at BARDA. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me today, Dr. Sotnik. So my name is Sheila Selmovich. I am a program manager within BARDA. BARDA has multiple divisions. My program is part of the Drive, which stands for Division of Research, Innovation, Ventures, and I'd be happy to chat more about it. By training, I'm a physicist, and I switched over to tissue engineering for my postdoc, and then did a stint at the State Department and was a program director at NIH. So I have, I would say, a fairly good understanding of how the different, several different federal government agencies influence R&D and partner with small companies, small businesses, and also how they view innovation.
Wonderful. And so, Sheila, I think I will start with you. If you can give us sort of in the broad strokes, first of all, what BARDA stands for and what is BARDA looking for. We're maybe familiar with the acronyms like DARPA, but what is BARDA and what is Drive in relations to BARDA?
Right. Well, that's a really good question. BARDA is actually a very small federal government entity, and you may have been hearing and reading more and more about us during this pandemic, because we are one of the really important parts of the government that is addressing the development of diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines, among others, for SARS-CoV-2. So you may have heard our acronym BARDA here and there. What it stands for is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. So we are part of the Department of Health and Human Services. And it's interesting that you mentioned DARPA. It may sound just, by the name that we are somewhat similar to DARPA, but we're actually not. So we actually develop and focus on making available medical countermeasures. And we do that by forming unique public-private partnerships in order to drive innovation from the research bench to the patient. So we're very much interested in, not just what we might end up in 50 years or 30 years, but really, how does this next project lead to a medical countermeasure to help improve patients' health? And so our approach to doing that is really quite flexible. We use different funding vehicles and funding authorities that are particularly flexible and nimble, very different from what I suppose a lot of the members of the audience today might be aware of. For example, within my division, we can go from solicitation or proposal submission to a contract within 30 days. I mean, let that sink in, right? I used to work at NIH. At NIH, the cycle is around 9 months at the minimum, right? So there's obviously room for both, but I hope that this indicates, the urgency that we see in developing these medical countermeasures. We have internally really cutting edge expertise. We have subject matter experts like Dr. Naraghi. We have subject matter experts in regulatory affairs, in clinical affairs. So we really provide, I would say, a very rounded support to any of the projects and to any of the partners that we decide to work with. And so I do want to emphasize that within all of this, we really focus on innovation. We are not just about, just stepwise improvement. We're really about novel, innovative solutions to major health security problems.
And so that's a really good segue. So you said major health security problems. So there are sort of three buckets, as I described, within BARDA Drive. And Pejman, if you can address, there's ENACT, there's sepsis, and there is this third bucket that sometimes is hard to define. Can you talk a little bit about that and what exactly BARDA is looking for, BARDA Drive is looking for?
So thank you for that question. I'm going to start with ENACT because that's the one I know most about. So ENACT, basically, we're looking for enabling pre-symptomatic diagnosis of disease, as well as enabling, for instance, triage of people who may have been involved in an accident and a trauma, being able to rapidly identify who needs treatment at what level. And the kinds of things that we have been interested in leveraging are sensors that can be wearable, that are flexible, that can, for instance, measure your vital signs without intrusion, that can measure, for instance, your heart rate and heart rate variability and breathing and things like that. But also beyond that, looking at, for instance, nerve, the patterns of nerve firing, interstitial fluid measurements of cytokines and chemokines. What are the parameters that are being changed? And then, of course, coupling these with algorithms and data analytics that will enable whatever device is being used to give a reasonable prediction and also a reasonable analysis of what is going on with you at the moment. One of the things that I love to say is we always look for devices that can be put on free-range humans, because it can't be anymore that you go into you have to go to a doctor's office, you have to go to a hospital in order to receive care. Obviously, the end result would be that you would go to one of these places. All we want to do is to be able to enable you to make better, more rapid decisions about your health, and be able to, do two things really. One, avoid unnecessary visits, try to find good ways, reasonable ways to prevent the worried well from overwhelming the system. But also, more importantly even than that, is to enable people who really do need to be treated to give them a reasonable incentive as to why they should go. It isn't that, let's encourage people to go to the doctor. It's to give them really information and tools to enable them to know if and when they should go to the doctor. That's one part of it. The other part is, if you can imagine, if we are good at developing these kinds of tools, and the kinds of tools that we're looking for are, for instance, microneedle patches and sensors, not really watches anymore. I think we're I think we're all past that, and I can explain why later. But I think more, things that are non-obtrusive to your lifestyle and would be continually worn so that they can produce good algorithms. And the other part of that is, if we develop these kinds of things, you're now enabling things such as pre-symptomatic diagnosis or pre-symptomatic indications that, hey, there's a good reason why you should use this this device that was just approved for at-home use. It was $50 per test by Elum, right? Now, it's fantastic that I can take something and without a prescription, take it and decide whether or not I'm COVID positive. But how many times am I going to be able to do that if it's $50 a test? And what indications do I have that tell me that it's a good idea for me to use it, right? That's one question that we want, and of course, expand those possibilities. Another is to enhance the potential for various telehealth providers to enable them to get some information from you other than just whatever you're texting, whatever you're showing your video chat with them, things like that. And then the other parts that, I think both Dr. Sanika and I are very excited about is the potential to be able to do a better job of monitoring people during clinical trials to reduce the number of failures during clinical trials, reduce the number of people that would drop out because of the burden of, if I have cancer, for instance, the last thing I want to do is now, in addition to all the other things I have to do, to go 3 times a week to a clinic to get my blood drawn and do other things, right? Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it if you have to, but perhaps we can give some signals that would alleviate some of that burden. And of course, where BARDA sits under ASPR, Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, and for that we really need good triage tools in case of a national emergency, such as a hurricane, a flood, earthquakes, things like that. And all of these kinds of things could be enabled by these types of sensors.
Great. And so Shayla, do you want to add about anything about, in addition to ENACT, there is a sepsis division and this third division of DRIVE?
So I actually manage the ENACT program. My colleague, Dr. Kim Shiretta, she manages the Solving Sepsis program. The Solving Sepsis program is really focused on detecting sepsis early and predicting the disease severity, as well as attempting to find treatments really from the beginning of the disease to the final outcome, whatever that might be, and hopefully it's going to be recovery, right? So the Solving Sepsis program also heavily relies on wearable sensors, again, to monitor the health of the individual, of a patient in a hospital, for example, and also to try, among others, to detect the onset of sepsis as early as possible at a stage where it's much easier to treat it than when it's, full-blown sepsis and the person, has to be moved to the ICU, etc. So the sepsis problem, I think, is really broad. It's certainly a disease that affects just way too many people in the United States and really around the world. And even though the causes might be different, the actual disease and the physiological response is sufficiently similar in many cases that we believe that we can actually try to address it through, for example, wearable sensors, through development of algorithms that help us make sense of all of the data. So it's really less about any particular sensor, wearable sensor. It's much more about simply trying to address the needs of Americans in combating sepsis. And then there's a third new program, Beyond the Needle, or actually not so new program. It's been recently renamed. It's focused on transforming vaccination using alternative routes of vaccine administration. And I think that's a topic that's highly relevant right now, right? So now that we are entering the stage of mass vaccination for SARS-CoV-2, right? One of the question is, well, do you have to use a syringe and a needle, and the standard vial, all of which requires, a number of different resources, certainly a surge capacity to produce, to manufacture and ship in a case like this one. The vaccines require, in several cases, a very specific cold chain. So the question is, obviously we're very grateful that we have the vaccines, right? But at the same time, I think the question is there a way to administer vaccines in a way that is even more efficient, that is much more accessible regardless of geographic location? Can we develop and administer vaccines in a form factor that allows for a much longer shelf life for the vaccines, so that they're much stable at under various environmental influences? One of the examples, and I'm just picking this example purely because it's something that sticks in my mind. Microneedle patches, for example, that are basically the size of a small Band-Aid that an individual can administer themselves. The microneedles contain a solid version of the vaccine, and the microneedles dissolve in the upper layer of the dermis. And that's one way how vaccines could be delivered. So, again, that's just one example, but I do think that this program is really especially important, and hopefully a lot of people will notice the relevance of these alternative routes of vaccine administration now that we're talking so much about vaccines.
This is great, and this is again a perfect segue. So this is not the first time that we're hosting BARDA here. We had a really fun night about maybe 6 months ago when we had a quiz night about BARDA-funded technologies, where we basically quiz the audience, is this a science fiction or is this a BARDA-funded technology? So I want to go to Pejman and ask if you can give us maybe some examples of what's bordering on the science fiction, and yet it's a reality that ENACT funded.
I'll give you two. The first one is far closer to fruition, at least in my estimation. And again, I am a contractor. I do not speak for the government. I'm just going to put that out there, but I'm really, really excited about this technology. It's called Sanika. It's a spin out of Northwestern University. And essentially, what amazes me is it uses essentially a single sensor. It's a single sensor. And when I first came to the to BARDA, from a molecular biology background, when I wanted to, measure all the RNA in your body to determine what disease you have, of course, one sensor isn't going to be enough. It's incredible because with one sensor, they basically measure 11 different vital signs: breathing, coughing, how much you sigh, how often, how deeply you breathe, the way you swallow. And this is all basically using a MEMS-based sensor device, accelerometer, to be able to enable you to do all of this. What is nice about that isn't that, oh yeah, that's really cool. It enables then a little patch that is literally the size of a Band-Aid. You put it under the suprasternal notch of the neck, and it just sits there. And you can shower with it, you can go to bed, you can wake up, and it continually transmits for a week all of these vital signs and continually monitors you, and then coupled to algorithms and other information that could be on your phone, gives you a signal, a sign that, hey, things are a little different. Now, one can say, well, but Apple Watch does that. I submit that this will do a far better job than an Apple Watch because it's never taken off. How many times have I forgotten to put my watch back on, when I wake up in the morning? How many times did I have to take it off in the middle of the night because it started like, turning on and waking me up because there's like a bright lighting in my face, right? So that's the thing that's really, really exciting. Another one that is not nearly as close to fruition, but I am very, very excited about, which I will admit that people made fun of us when we even thought about funding these people, is out of UC San Diego. And we are talking about a patch, or actually something that could be embedded into clothing or in your bed or things like that, that can literally measure your vagus nerve activity, the firing pattern, completely non-invasively. No needle, no probe. It literally measures the evanescent wave from the electrical impulses from your vagus nerve. And right now, we are looking at determining how well that information may or may not correlate with cytokine changes in a person's body. This is just two examples of 14 different projects that are ongoing. A lot of other ones which are honestly just as impressive as far as I can tell.
And Shayla, do you have any other examples to add? This is so fascinating.
Well, I mean, I do manage the ENACT program, and I would just, I have to say that I'm partial to all of our projects. I, don't have a favorite child, I would say. I will say, though, that we have a range of very different projects. So one of the things that I really love about our program is that, we think very broadly in terms of, what the program is about, as Dr. Naraghi explained earlier, but we also are really receptive to the ideas from potential applicants. And if they have something truly innovative, something different that, still addresses our mission, we're very open to it. So I certainly do invite all of the attendees here to take a look at our website and just look at our portfolio. We have, I think, around 14 contracts, and they range from, telemedicine plus data analysis to, any kind of wearables, to, vagus nerve monitoring, to, on-demand blood drop analysis to, attempt to detect a viral infection. So it's a really, I think, very interesting and very diverse portfolio.
That's great. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we have sort of a continuum of commercialization here, very early pre-companies still at the university level, IP in the lab, to more scale-up companies. So can we talk a little bit about procedurally what kind of level of readiness the companies need to be, or technologies? Where do you meet them?
So I would say that depends if we're talking about BARDA as a whole or DRIVE specifically. So I like to think of my division DRIVE as essentially the innovation arm of BARDA, which kind of, I think, by definition then means that we're open to more early stage technology developments. While the rest of BARDA is, I think, a little bit more focused on actual product development. If, for example, we're talking about diagnostics, right? I think they're more on the side of actually developing the device, running clinical trials, and then talking about commercialization. In DRIVE, we're more looking at pilot studies in humans, perhaps animal studies, if that's something that's appropriate for the project. Either way, I think it's something that might help the audience here is we definitely don't do proof of concept. We sort of expect that, at least in DRIVE, that the proof of concept, that the scientific premise is already fully established. And we want to see that kind of preliminary data. We want to discuss the feasibility of the project based on what's already been done in the lab. As far as my program, ENACT, is concerned, we've accepted a range of different TRLs. They are still kind of on the earlier stage, but I would say they range anywhere from TRL 3 to maybe 6. Again, I would say that's probably the range more or less that's sort of appropriate. At the end of the day, it really depends on the project. And so I would say, any interested applicant should just reach out to us, and then we'll talk and see, where is the risk. I guess the whole point of this is that we are very accepting of risk, right? So we really are interested, and I'll speak now specifically about my project. We really are interested in high risk, high reward projects, right? So if something is a sure thing, then, the question that I would ask, well, why do you need us, right? But if you kind of need to still show or test out your technology in a pilot setting in humans, and you kind of need need a push and some perhaps federal funding help to get through that stage, that's certainly the range where we're happy to talk with anybody.
Great, and let's just give audience some facts. So BARDA DRIVE funds up to $749,000, and companies need to have at least 30% of cost share. So can you or Pejman talk a little bit about just the logistics of it? And also, if you can So what I've been advising companies that are interested in BARDA Drive is go first to the tech watch and then maybe have a marketing call before you actually submit an application. So can you talk a little bit about, again, logistics of it?
So Benjamin, did you want to take this question?
Sure. So for Drive, you literally write a 2,500 word abstract. And basically in that, you should include all the kinds of information that you would include in a full proposal. It's hard, but you're going to need to. That's what the requirement is. Unfortunately, and again, I see this as a reviewer, no graphs or pictures, which makes it tougher to review. And then of course, and then also a cost proposal, which is simplicity itself. I mean, I used to apply to government grants all the time. It's amazing. The other thing that you need to understand is anything that comes from BARDA is a contract. We do not do grants. So everything will be milestone driven. There will be specific things that you need to do, and you are paid only after you have achieved those milestones and we agree that that milestone has been achieved. That is something that I think is really different sometimes for some of the earlier stage companies to grasp. The other is the cost share is not cash, right? It can be. Would be great, but it can also be in kind, right? But the example I always like to give is, please don't say that my overhead is 50% and therefore I'm only going to charge you 30% of the overhead, and that's the cost share. No, sorry, I wouldn't fund it if it came to me that way, right? And so those are the main things for to consider for applying, and then like Dr. Salomir said. In 30 days, typically within 30 days, you'll have an answer, and I would say within 90 days, you have a signed contract and funds ready to go. The duration of the projects is going to be, we try to keep it 12 months, maybe 18 months maximum. There's a very good reason for that. As you know, the amount of money isn't all that much, and we want to be realistic about what it is that people want to propose and what kind of timeline they envision. We really want to kind of push people to say, look, I'm pretty close. I'm not really BARDA, what we call BARDA ready, but if I do this, I will then be BARDA ready. Not that the only projects that we are interested in are things that would be of interest to BARDA later. If your project makes you much more competitive for VC funding, if your project makes you much more competitive for Gates grant funding, no problem, great, right? It's all about the technology, and it's not necessarily about feeding BARDA additional projects.
And has Drive ever done the follow-on funding into the project that they originally funded?
Yeah, Solving Sepsis has done that. There's one company, I think Cytovale, they received follow-on funding, and they are, I believe, in their pivotal clinical trial now. For basically for that, you basically take a venous blood draw, and within 10 minutes, it tells you how bad the sepsis may be, and if you have sepsis, from the squeezability of your white cells.
Amazing.
Yes, the squeezability
Again,
of your white cells.
Science fiction completely. Exactly. This is great. Well, I just want to pause and see if we get any questions from the audience, because I don't want to be the only one asking questions. So if people do have questions or comments, now would be a good time to open a dialogue. Or you can post it into the comments and we will try to address them.
So perhaps as we're waiting for some questions and comments to come in, I did want to emphasize something that Dr. Naragi just said, and it refers to the cost share. So, one of the reasons, there are two reasons obviously for doing the cost share. First of all, it gives the partner company simply more money to work with overall, right? But really the most important reason is because, again, these aren't grants where the federal government gives somebody money and they can just take it and, do whatever they want with it. It really is supposed to be partnership. Both sides have skin in the game. And, that partnership extends beyond just the pure financial part, right? we talk very often with our partners, on a monthly basis, sometimes on a weekly basis, sometimes much more often. We really are available. We also have this fantastic expertise in HISE in terms of regulatory experts, clinical experts, clearly subject matter experts, right? So, we still obviously, want to aid our partners in developing those areas of expertise themselves. But we do have that support in-house. And again, it's really all intended to help make a project a success and hopefully, eventually help the partner commercialize it or get it to the commercialization ready stage.
Yeah, that's really important. I also wanted to say that obviously the accelerator network comes in handy, and everyone is looking not just funds, not just money, but smart money. And I think the fact that BARDA has expertise, but also has now a network of 13 accelerators, I think also probably helps, right?
Very much.
Great.
And I can't overemphasize the importance of smart money, because you can get money and then they can be very onerous things put on you, especially from VCs. And if they can't provide you that additional support to help you make introductions and other things, that's something that you really need to watch out for.
Absolutely. How do you work with other investors, angels, VCs? Does that figure out into equation or not at all?
I guess it figures in because it gives us more assurance about the viability of a company if they have had angel investing. But really, we are a science and technology-driven organization. So if you don't have angel investing, it's not a problem. As long as the science is solid, that's what really matters. There is an entire venture group now at BARDA that is starting, and they will actually take dilutive funding. They will give dilutive funding for work. So it is one of the things that I think is really important to note is BARDA, whether us, Drive or the greater BARDA, whatever you are proposing, we need to clearly be able to understand if this thing works, if this thing gets, whatever project, goes to fruition. Therefore, you are closer to commercializing a product that could stand on its own if the US government suddenly decided not to fund another penny, right? So people, like for instance, for diagnostics, people have come to the diagnostics division and said, hey, I can make a great Zika diagnostic. Like, great, we need Zika diagnostics. But that's the only thing we are making. That's our only product. No matter how good the idea is, we wouldn't be able to fund it because it has to have additional applications that could be used in typical medical practice, yes? And we don't do diabetes, we don't do cancer, we don't do heart disease, we don't do Alzheimer's, right? But if your application has applications to those things too, all the better. That's an actual huge plus for us.
Oh, interesting. So there is a question, but before I read this question, I noticed that the BARDA Drive did fund some of the early university technologists, pre-company, not companies yet, but still at the university. So the question is, do you care where IP resides at that point? Do you care if it's already licensed to something or if IP is still with the university?
So I'm going to speak here for Drive. We do not care because the government does not take the IP. So it's really up to the applicant to decide what they want to do with it. And I'll also highlight, since you just mentioned universities, we don't have a preference for an academic lab versus a small business versus a large business. We care about the project and its feasibility and the potential to lead to a final product.
Mm-hmm. That's really important to understand. Thank you so much. Okay, the question, go ahead, Pajman.
And the only thing that matters for IP for us is that you have freedom to operate. If you come to us with an idea, and we're like, but wait a minute, how will somebody else not come and eat your cake?
Right.
If you can't answer that question well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you need to defend that this is your IP. Sure. So question here, how does ENACT work with industry partners outside of funding early stage technologies? So you must have some industry partners that maybe help in manufacturing or in, do you work with industry partners or maybe pharma?
Yeah, I was wondering exactly what's hiding behind this question. So speaking for ENACT, no, we simply fund earlier stage projects. So one thing, and this only a little bit relates to this question, is that we in the government are not allowed to do any kind of matchmaking, which means we are not allowed to say to a partner, go work with this pharmaceutical companies that can, or this CRO that can do XYZ for you. So that's not something we can do. However, an applicant may already come, with subcontractors or several partners can come together and we can jointly then decide to fund or to create a project. That's a different issue. But I would say within ENACT specifically, we're pretty much just focusing on working one-on-one with individual partners.
Great, thank you, good to know. And Pejman, to your last comment about freedom to operate, so during your due diligence, do you actually need a legal opinion on that, or do companies just have to reasonably defend their understanding of freedom to operate?
So kind of in between those two. So yeah, we certainly not a legal opinion. Please don't send me your illegal opinions. It has to be something more than, it has to be something believable, right? What's the patent that you, for instance, you have? What is the license that you have, and what does that patent or license say about what fields your application applies to, right? Typically that is enough, right? And the other question that a lot of times people have, which is surprising to me, the government does not take IP. You have whatever IP you develop from the funding that we give you, and I think this is government-wide, it's your IP, right? The only time that the government may come in, and I don't believe this has actually ever happened, is if someone, we pay for an IP to be developed. It works. It looks like the product can be developed, and then there's a business decision not to carry it forward. Then the government can come and say, well, then we are going to take that IP and give it to someone who will make it into a product. If you're not going to, because we spent money making it, right? But there's nothing that says that you can't go ahead and make profit from it. Not a problem. We will, and the government will buy your product. No problem if it's something that is needed, right? But there is no encumbrance for your IP from the government.
Great. There is a clarifying question, and Ayman, sorry if I will put you, yeah, if you can ask directly, that would be great. Oh, okay, on another call, never mind. So another question that we have here, does the ENACT team partners with other government agencies to advance product or technology?
So yes, that's something that we actually do a lot. So in general, I would say that one of the things that we consider success as federal workers is to leverage the successes and the technologies that are being developed by other federal agencies, right? So rather than replicating somebody else's work, we actually do quite often work together with other agencies, specifically, especially with other DoD agencies, of course, other HHS agencies, to leverage our funding together, really with the thought that the sum of parts is much larger than the individual parts, right? So we talk a lot to DARPA, we talk a lot to DITRA. We have interagency agreements with, you know, for example, the US Air Force for projects. So yeah, we do talk to them a lot, and it's actually really a good idea for us to know if a potential applicant it already has funding from another federal agency. It really helps us decide, you know, to what extent that funding can potentially be leveraged, to what extent, you know, we can push the research further. It also, frankly, helps us reduce the risk a little bit if we know that another agency is supporting a project. So yeah, we do that all the time, and we certainly welcome it.
That's great. As you evaluate the technology, do you also evaluate the skills of the team? Is that important to you? Or so Pejman, can you talk a little bit about that?
Very much so. Because where the rubber meets the road is how can this become commercialized? And it takes very different skill sets to invent something, even make a prototype of it, than making, you know, millions of copies of it that all work within, you know, very strict parameters, and they work all the time, and you can have it be reliably made. I always like to give the example of myself. When I used to work at Lawrence Livermore, I sincerely believed that I was making products. I so was not, because and I thought, well, you know, I'm producing 300,000 lots of reagents for a very important national, you know, surveillance program. Of course I'm making a product. No, it's really not that, right? Because there's all kinds of other things that go into those kinds of considerations. Now, how much profit will you actually be able to make? Will you be able to survive on that profit? How much money would you be able to reasonably expect, you know, every time a doctor uses your product, you know? From, like, for instance, ICD-9 codes, those kinds of things, you know, me as a technologist have no idea about, right? But those are really important things that I need to be able to see in an application, that this person or that person or that person knows what they are talking about, or they are connected with, you know, this funder or this accelerator or this other people that can provide that help to them.
So that's where the fact that maybe technologies are associated with the accelerator comes to really play an important role, because helping companies understand the reimbursement strategies, the regulatory pathways, the talent position, that all of that takes a program or incubator or accelerator to help them. That's great. I want again to open the floor to questions, or if people just want to share their technologies to see if this group from BARDA might be interested in. Now would be the time. We have 15 minutes left. Don't see any hands, but I do see people with technologies that I know would be interested in this connection. All right, maybe people are shy and will reach out separately, and that's okay too. Is there something, Shayla and Pejman, that we didn't touch on that you think is important for this group to know? Maybe you can talk a little bit about TechWatch and what that is about, and how that is an important step, or anything else.
The only thing that I can think of that I forgot to mention is both ENACT and Solving Sepsis are looking for pathogen agnostic diagnostics, or pathogen agnostic tools, right? So monitoring the individual, monitoring the person, monitoring signs, as opposed to, you know, I have a better way to detect anthrax. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you have something amazing that can really do a good job of detecting a pathogen, you should definitely go to the BARDA diagnostics division. But those are not the kinds of things that we are really interested in.
Good to know. Excellent.
Hey, Karina, this is Abida. I have a question for Sheila and Pejman, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Sheila and Pejman, or either or, whoever wants to answer. If I'm a startup and I am thinking about applying to drive, and then I'm thinking about proposing, a project in my application, if it's appropriate, could you touch on, what product, like what the milestones in the contract might look like? Is it, could I say and include things like, I'd like to propose a study with BARDA, or is it around a specific feature that's, really focused around health security with my technology? Like, what is it appropriate if you hit on some of maybe even if it's generic, but like the types of projects you want to look at and what you don't want to look at maybe might be even more important?
So maybe I can take at least part of that question in terms of what my program specifically is looking for and what it's not looking for. Dr. Naragi mentioned that we're looking both at sensors, wearable sensors specifically, though other sensors as well, but then also the data analytics piece of that. What we're looking for is true innovation. So, he mentioned earlier, we're moving away from, the standard wristwatch. That's been done, and there are benefits and there are advantages and disadvantages to that. We're looking to really push the boundaries in terms of novel sensing mechanisms, in terms of novel form factors. And this goal is driven by the question of how can we make all of these technologies that we're developing, how can we make them actually useful to individuals, to medical care providers, to organizations, to whoever ultimately relies on all of the data, right? As an example, let's say there's a wrist-worn device that's, highly sensitive, highly precise and accurate, but it's just really bulky and you need to charge it every day, and half the time you forget and half the time it's uncomfortable, so you don't end up wearing it, which means you lose out on valuable data. We lose out on valuable data, right? Additionally, having such a device might require that you have a smartphone, and the device itself might be really costly. That automatically means not everybody can get it, right? And so the utility of the technology that we're developing then is really diminished, because the device is not going to be useful to every single person living in this country. So, one of the things that I'd like people to really think about it, how can we, for lack of a better word, and it's not politically meant, but how can we democratize these technological solutions, right? Part of addressing human health is obviously, the technology and therapeutics and vaccines and diagnostics, et cetera. But a part of it is actually getting people to use it, right? So, in specifically talking about sensors, is there a form factor that people are much more likely to use? Let's say if the form factor was, let's say, a Band-Aid basically, or Band-Aid sized device that you just put on your arm, you can shower with it, don't have to charge it for a week, and maybe then you toss it, and maybe it's kind of an over-the-counter sensor, right? That's going to have a very different impact on usability than something that costs, let's say, $600, and you have to continuously think about charging and downloading the data, etc. So, I'm a little bit hesitant about giving examples because that tends to restrict people. So I'll only say that I really, hope that people will come up with kind of completely out-of-the-box solutions for this. Not just in terms of sensor developments, but also about AI solutions. And then the other point that I'd like to make is, we often talk to technologists who are looking for the problem, right? So they think they have a solution, let's say it's a device, and then they're trying to find a way to apply it. And I can understand that kind of thinking, understand, that there's sometimes room for it. However, we are really focused on solving biomedical problems. So that needs to be the first question, right? Which biomedical problem, which health problem, which medical problem are you trying to solve? And then find the appropriate technology for it. And so sometimes this is simply a matter of packaging and how you talk about it. But sometimes it's really a matter of actually developing a whole new approach, a whole new technology. So that's just something, that over my years at NIH and now at BARDA, I've noticed that there's sometimes this disconnect between, do you have a technology that's looking for a problem, or do you have a problem and now you're developing a technology? That helps.
Oh, that's absolutely. I always tell young startups, fall in love with the problem, not with the solution, because then you can try different solution and find the right one. Absolutely. Pejman, anything to add there?
No, I think Dr. Samir covered it well. I think again, to a hammer, everything is a nail, right? So I understand devices. So things that are flexible, that are easy to use, that don't need to be taken on and off and recharged, and had the less interaction you have with it, the better off you are. I mean, you can have the most amazing sensor technology. If people don't wear it, it provides zero value, and it's incredible how difficult it turns out to be to get people who are perfectly healthy to wear a device. If I have COPD, I'm going to wear that watch, right? This is about life and death, right? It's not that case if I'm a college student.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, so in the last 5 minutes, I just want to see if there are any other questions or comments.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for your time. I have a quick question, actually 2 questions. The first one is, we are interested in actually applying for the Beyond the Needle opportunity. I'm not sure if this is appropriate for this discussion. I apologize because I came in late, I couldn't find the link. So I'm sorry about that. But we're looking into that for developing a new therapeutic approach towards delivering of biological drugs for various routes. Specifically, we have one in mind, nasal delivery. And I'm looking at, actually, I downloaded the application. It's not actually a form, I sort of cut and paste it into Word. And point D5, where it's essentially asking about the stage of development of the product, gives multiple options. So one of them is preclinical, for example, and the other one is phase 1 and so forth. So just to sum it up, my 2 questions is, first, for the Beyond the Needle, is if you could maybe speak to that, and if this is not appropriate, I apologize. And then the second one, maybe this is appropriate, the stage of development, if you can just briefly discuss the different sort of discrete steps that are defined there. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Noel.
I'm not an expert in the kinds of therapeutics and things like that, but you don't necessarily have to have phase 1 completed before you can apply to drive, right? If you're applying to BARDA therapeutics, you probably want phase 1 completed. But for drive, I don't think that's going to be a critical factor. The main things that I understand they are looking for are alternate routes of delivery that are much less cumbersome than needles, that would alleviate supply chain issues with needles, as well as alleviate the logistics of having to go to a doctor to get a medicine delivered. There are a lot of the drugs now that need you to go in to be just infused with different things. If your device can do that, that would be an important thing. And I would recommend you having a market research call with the Beyond the Needle group.
And Noel, you can contact me and I can arrange for that.
Thank you
but
very much.
Shayla, if you want to just touch on that as well, let me put my email address into.
Thank you.
Yep.
I mean, Dr. Naragi got it just right. And, if whenever you're in doubt, the best bet is just to contact the program office. I believe it should be listed here somewhere in the chat, but if not, it's also on the Drive website. Yeah, just, always feel free to reach out to them.
Thank you.
And the other thing that you can also do is you can apply for TechWatch. The nice thing about TechWatch is you may or may not get chosen to present at TechWatch, but the nice thing about TechWatch is if you do get chosen to present, it's a 30-minute presentation that is not just to BARDA, it's to BARDA, FDA, CDC, NIH, DITRA, DARPA, the US Army. I mean, the list is incredible. And you just get exposure to all of them. You still need to be able to hit the main marks, right? What is my IP? What's the idea? Why does it matter? How much will it cost? What's the general theme of the things that I'm going to accomplish? And how much money do I need? Rough order of magnitude, and what will be the product that comes out? I strongly urge whoever is gonna apply to TechWatch or to come to a market research call. I always say, don't bring me a salad bar. Tell me what it is that I'm about to eat, because I understand, you have a technology that has all kinds of applications, and I want to make sure that you understand all the different applications that I have. But for us, because of the difficulty we have in telling you what to do, because we cannot tell you what to do, we literally cannot. It's law that we cannot tell you what to do. So I may have great ideas of what you can do with your technology. I cannot tell you what that would be. You need to come up with the best application of the technology that you have for the problem that you're trying to solve. So that's why it's so important to read the BARDA BAA as well as the DRIVE website before you talk to anyone.
Yeah,
advice.
Can I do a quick follow-up on this? So
yes, yeah.
It's just that at the beginning, when I got into the call, you guys were discussing about that this additional funding would allow to do that extra push to get the product into the market. However, when developing a therapeutic device, obviously the steps are various and sometimes complicated as well. So my question was, for this 750 grand that would be applying for, the different type of stages that are defined here are very different. So one thing is obviously preclinical, another thing is to have a phase 2. So that's why I was wondering about that. So what if I may, what I understood based on what you guys described is that not necessarily the product has to be ready for commercialization per se, but it has to have enough traction to get it there. Is that right? Or, I mean, how do we, given the different type of stages of development, how do we mitigate the two points? Thank you.
To me, I think that's a reasonable way of describing it. There has to be a reasonable expectation of this is how I'm going to get to commercialization and being able to get regulatory approval. But how far I have to be before I qualify for Beyond the Needle, that's the kind of thing that you really need to basically just say, this is where I am with this particular funding and what I'm proposing to do. This is where I can get, and then you get very good feedback. You'll be able to, people will be able to tell you, that sounds really interesting. That doesn't fit what we need. Here are literally other people in the government that you can talk to. That's the thing that I love more than anything about BARDA. I have applied to all kinds of government agencies. BARDA was the first place I actually went to where people were allowed to tell me, here are other places you should go, right? And that was really, I cannot tell you how refreshing that was. And so I think that's why it's important. Tell us what it is that you think is the best way that you can apply this, and people can tell you, exactly how that applies, as opposed to, here's a technology, tell me how I can apply it. I can't give you any kind of an answer that way.
Well, that's a perfect ending to a really informative session. Natalie is looking at me, so I know we need to, unfortunately, come to a close, but really great discussion, a lot of very good information. Thank you so much to our two speakers, Pejman and Shayla. We couldn't ask for a better delivery of information here. So everyone have a great holiday season. We obviously will bring more of BARDA to the Science Center in the new year. And we're looking forward to your applications, and we're looking forward to working very closely with ENACT and with DRIVE. So thanks again to everyone, and thanks for great questions.
Thank you for having us.